Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes a pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Last Round Podcast, episode 80. Once again, in quarantine mode. I sound like a broken record, right, Mike?
Yeah, it's kind of getting a little bit monotonous now. Groundhog Day. Every day is the same.
Yeah, it is. But, we're trying to make the best of it, like we said in our past quarantine episodes. And we're trying to deliver content and the best guests in combat sports for you guys every week. So once again, I'm Danny Z with my co-host Michael Shepard. Thanks again for listening, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. We appreciate it. Thank you for sticking with us, especially during these tough and difficult times. But if you're watching the video portion of this podcast at the moment, you can already see who we have on. I think... Andy, I think your mic might be muted.
Yeah, my mic's muted, but
okay. I wasn't sure. I just wanted to make sure. So, the executive director of the California State Athletic Commission, Andy Foster, is on again. He was with us the first time back in January, but we're actually quite happy and quite intrigued to have him on once again for the second time. Thank you for joining us, Andy.
Sure.
So just before we came on there, obviously, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, we were just talking about it just before we started recording, said that in California, professional sporting events can begin some type of opening phases or maybe looking in or beginning events starting at the beginning of June, because obviously you are a sporting official in the state of California, the top sporting official for the Athletic Commission. What's your whole take on that? Were you involved in any of those discussions with the governor and his team?
Not with the announcement, no. The commission and I have been working on a procedure and a plan, and have been for quite a while, on what phase 3 of the reopening plan would look like. And so we certainly have some language drafted out. We're going to be holding a meeting in the very near future, probably next Friday, to go over these regulations. And we're gonna ask for emergency regulations so we can get these things done and up. And the important thing is, let's get the promoters. When the governor says go and the state says go, then we want to be able to facilitate that and regulate combat sports like we always have.
So just so we can kind of deliver to our fans or our listeners who don't know exactly what the governor said, if you can kind of just summarize what exactly. So are events able to start at the beginning of June, or is it just kind of maybe a first step into that realm?
Well, I certainly don't want to speak for him, but to paraphrase from what I gathered is, if the trend lines of COVID-19, I'm talking about the hospitalization, all these things stay relatively stable and we don't see some kind of giant spike or anything, what I got from it was his hopes that we could begin to, maybe sports could begin in the early part of June with no audiences, with a lot of mitigation efforts. And that's what we've been working on, a lot of safety protocols put into place. And that's what the Dr. Wallace, I'm sure you're very familiar with at all the fights, head of our MAC. We just had another meeting last Friday night where we went through all this with our legal counsels, and we've just been working with doctors and just keeping this very medically sound, because it's got to be medically driven, to make sure that we're able to mitigate this until there's another solution. We go into phase 4. Now,
is there anything that obviously Dana White went to Florida and was the first combat sports, at least in the United States, to put on an event last week, or he put on quite a few, like 2 within a couple days span. Were you watching those events, or especially the one on Saturday in Jacksonville, Florida, to really see how the UFC conducted it, especially the state of Florida? Were you monitoring the details of that event?
I watched all 3 of them. I read the plan. I think UFC is a world-class company. They came out with a marvelous, wonderful plan. The plan, I think their execution of the plan got better each time, just like any promoter or any type of agency that's regulating would have. You come up with a plan, you're going to get better, and they had a short amount of time to get better. So the first one, they fixed their holes, they got better the next time, and I felt like the last one they were better than the first one. And I was talking to a lot of the officials on the ground, because I know a lot of those guys, and they were getting tested a lot. All this stuff was happening. They didn't like the swab up their nose, but anyway, yeah.
Andy, have you seen what the British Board of Boxing have been announcing? They're saying they're going to try and limit the early cards to 5 fights, no title fights, and no foreign opponents. Are California going to be looking at anything similar to that?
Well, we've been in discussions, and this language is not in our regulation package about the number of rounds. I have some discretion with that as the executive officer, so I'm not sure that's necessarily needs to be put in, because we already have kind of that. But we've not discussed limiting foreign fighters. I don't think that's the idea. At least what we've got so far. I think the idea is testing. Mm-hmm. That's an idea, but if you're, I don't think it really matters where you're from. I think it matters whether you've got COVID-19 or you could potentially give COVID-19 to somebody else. So that's not been a discussion.
I read the ESPN piece about the California working with WADA and the Sports Medicine Research and Testing Laboratory, trying to get a process where you can get a turnaround within 24 hours to see whether the person has coronavirus or has had coronavirus. Is there anything you can summarize on that for us quickly?
Well, I mean, that's what I think the audience needs to really understand. It's very important. Because there's basically 2 types of testing that you can go down. You can test for antibodies, or you can test for the antigen, or you can test for both. And the antigen testing right now, unless the CDC changed their guidelines today, as of last week, if you're going to test for the antigen, you need to have symptoms. Okay, you need to have symptoms, which basically, what Smurtle did, or that's the acronym, it's what we call it, Salt Lake Lab. Dr. Eichner, Major League Baseball essentially set him up. I mean, he's ready to test. And you can look at the Washington Post article that came out last week and talked about that. But we're working with him. He does a lot of stuff with us anyway. And Major League Baseball, he's going to do all their testing. He's also going to do our testing, or at least we can't require them to use him. But he's there. He's able to test for us. And the big thing about him for the antigen testing is, I mean, we're requiring it for people that don't have symptoms. I understand that's a little bit above and beyond, but it's not taken away from the public health, because he's set up for sports, and the part that he doesn't use for sports, he's donating to the public health. So he's got a lot of testing capacity, so he's going to be able to test for basically other antigen tests that are not related to sports, but he's going to test for professional sports, including boxing, at his lab. So I think that's maybe that's way down in the nitty gritty, but I just wanted to kind of make that explanation as to how we're doing it. And yes, they're a WADA accredited laboratory, one of 2. UCLA's also, but they're also now CLIA certified, which is the CDC does the CLIA thing. I'm sorry, the FDA. The FDA does the CLIA certification. They've got CLIA certified, so not only can they do anti-doping test, but now they can do COVID-19 testing.
Will isolation?
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to ask. They'll do the testing and then there'll be isolation before the fights, like in a hotel, like the UFC did.
Yeah, I mean, and again, all this is subject to change, but I'll give you kind of a nutshell of what we're talking about here. Is like, if you want to come to fight on a card in California, and look, guys, this may sound like overkill. That's kind of the idea in some ways, okay, because this stuff's contagious. But we essentially, the doctor will order some kind of test. I mean, not order, but the regulation package, get a test, whether it be antibody, fill out a questionnaire, whatever, early on, like right at the beginning, okay? Then if more tests are needed, we'll look at that. Then fight week, another test. If more tests are needed, we'll look at that. And then when you get there to the fight, you're going to be socially distanced and quarantined, and we're going to test again with the full battery of tests, with everything that Dr. Eichner is offering. And we should have the results back on that one within max 24 hours. And hopefully it's a lot sooner than that. Hopefully we can figure out a way to get it done quicker than that. But max 24 hours, and then at that point the fighters can be released to weigh in. And now look, there's a lot of stuff that could change from what I just told you, but that's kind of where our thoughts are. So if you're tested at the beginning, you might ask, well, why are you doing it that? Well, we don't want to waste our time and infect people in the gym and do all of these other things. Then when you get there and you're starting to go, you don't want to have the infection or have COVID-19 on the way there. So you want to test to make sure that you don't show up and then when you get there, just for an extra precaution, we're going to quarantine you again to make sure. And look, this may sound like overkill, but it's the best plan. I mean, we've had a lot of people look at it, and, we're just trying to get there so that it's not overly burdensome, but at the same time can accomplish the goal. And, what the doctors all tell me, there's not a way to guarantee nobody's going to catch this. That's what I've been told. There's not a way. But this will greatly reduce the likelihood of that happening.
Speaking on that in terms of like the likelihood and stuff, like going back to the UFC testing, I think Dana White said that they tested, 1,100 people there, or maybe in terms of how many times they did it, and only 3 of them. I believe it was Jacare and his 2 cornermen who got tested positive. And in terms of that ratio, only 3 of them, at least what they reported, as opposed to everybody else who got tested. Do you view that like as a type of success? I mean, not that obviously you don't want anybody to catch it, but I mean, in terms of like the overall plan that they had going in, do you view that as a type of success?
Yeah. I mean, they if they hadn't have been able to do the test and then to find Jacare, who unfortunately had it, then it could have been. I think it could have been. I think at least from the pre-screenings, the plan. The plan work. I mean, you learn, you live and you learn. You learn a lot of these things all the time, So that's one of the things that we were like looking at and thinking about when we did that, when we looked at it.
Andy, moving to fight night, is there going to be anything different in terms of, will the referee be wearing a mask? Are we going to have remote judges from further afield, or are they still going to be ringside? And also, I assume, looking at the UFC and what they did in Nicaragua, I assume they're going to be, wiping down and cleansing the canvas in between fights.
Yeah. Again, like these things are kind of fluid, and we're still working the things out. But I'm not in favor of remote judging.
Right.
We're not going to have a fight if we have to have remote judging. We're just not ready. We have to do that. We're not going to do it. I think you miss a lot by doing that. we're going to have a lot of disinfectant type things and that type of thing. You may, we're not there yet. I'm just telling you, it may be that the judges sit a little bit further back than normal. Okay.
Right.
Not sure about that 100% yet. We're looking at that. It may be that there's a barrier, like a plexiglass or something. It could be. We're looking at a lot of different scenarios to keep it down, and we're still in the talks about your first question. We're still looking at that. We're looking at all of this stuff, but we're in the process, but we're not done. But you're asking, and I think it's important to kind of tell you what our thoughts are, especially following the announcement today.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Have any promoters, we're assuming they have, but have any, especially boxing promoters, been in contact with you, maybe like a De La Hoya, Bob Arum, Eddie Hearn, any of those guys, in terms of, because obviously you're going to take the lead on this in terms of the commission. You have to give the okay for them to put on events. Have you been able to talk to any of them or any of their teams in terms of going forward?
I've talked to many promoters that run TV, that have TV, because if you can't have an audience, it doesn't really make sense for a club. If you don't have a TV contract, which is it's just the nature of what we're dealing with right now. But if you're having no audience events and it's a professional event, you want to put it on the ESPN or the Zone or any of the rest of them, absolutely. We all know the same people. So, yeah, I've certainly had those conversations.
Andy, when they do start back up, are you going to try to limit it to maybe certain venues? Because each venue is obviously a different size, and they bring different kind of, things that are trial and error that you're going to have to work in. So are you going to try to keep it to maybe a few venues?
That's really not been – that part's not been discussed, at least from the it has been discussed in the fact that a lot of the promoters say, when we get this venue, we're staying here for a while. So it's going to be the same venue over and over and over, which makes sense. But, it just doesn't make sense. I understand your question as far as the complexity of Staples Center or the Forum versus the Avalon Theater comes to mind, or wherever. It's going to be more of a studio type environment for boxing. It's going to be small. It's going to be a limited number of people. MMA might be a little bit bigger, but it's still going to be a small number of people. We're not talking about a tremendous amount of fights, and you don't need to have the Forum, which is more complicated, I would think, because of just the sheer size of the place. It works very, very well in big events and that type of thing, but we're not going to have lots of people there because it's not necessary. There's just not that. Even with a full production crew, some of the promoters and I are talking, we're thinking with commission staff, with everybody, we're talking about just slightly more than 100 people.
So somewhere maybe like a Fantasy Springs Casino, a smaller venue like that would be more ideal.
That certainly, that's certainly. We'll have to wait and see what they come up with, but that type of atmosphere, that type of venue would certainly work, I would think, for what we're talking about.
Andy, did you see the fight in Nicaragua that was back a few weeks ago?
I did.
What did you think of? Did you see how they spaced the crowd out? And is that something that California will look at, or will when the crowds are back, the crowds are just back?
No, I think we're at least the commission will look at all of these things. That's our job, to look and to try to promote combat sports and try to do it safely. And my job is to follow, and I will do my job and try to do it exactly as it's supposed to. Follow exactly what the governor and what the state, where the commission wants to go with this. But I've got to think that you're not going to go from point A to point B. We're not going to be able to flip a switch and fill a Staples Center right back up. I wouldn't think. Now, I don't know how people, and I think there'll probably be some steps in between that. And look, I watched the Nicaragua event, the event, and how they had masks on, everybody was spaced out. I mean, all of these are ideas. We're not there yet. We're not even to having shows again yet. But with the announcement, we're in the process of looking at that. So, getting the no audience shows. That's a good question. Certainly thought about it.
Andy, in terms of your team, like your inspectors and all that judges, are you still looking to have maybe the same amount of employees there at a typical big event, or are you going to reduce that number as well?
Well, I mean, we're going to keep the number that we need to ensure health and safety. In fact, you could see like actually one or two more instead of less, because we're going to have people specifically looking to make sure that all of the sanitation protocol, all of the protocols are being followed. So I think that's an important piece. But having said that, there's not going to be as many bouts, okay, not as many bouts. So instead of these massive cards that we all know, we all come to love, but we're there at Staples till real late, we're not going to see that. So if you're talking about 5 bouts, it's going to be, we're going to do our job. We're going to still do all of the things that we normally do, and there's still a lot to a fight. The inspectors have got to do the drug test and the neuro, all these various things. But there's just not going to be the same number of bouts. So I think it will be a less number, but not because we're trying to lower our standards to have events. We're going to be less people because we don't have as many bouts on a fight card.
Andy, you probably heard, obviously you follow the UFC, the Dana White was talking about moving, the whole thing to a fight island. One thing I was wondering is, if it's a sporting event, it's a combat sport, it would need a commission surely to govern the event to make it a professional bout. Is that correct?
Well, in the United States, I think, and most parts of the world, I think that's right. Yeah.
So I just wonder, if he takes it to a fight island, like he says, how officially is it going to work? You have any idea? Or?
No, I don't really know. I don't.
From a promoter's perspective, what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I don't really have they have great fights. It's great. It's a great. I mean, I fought in the Costa Rica Bodog, so I know a little bit about the little island. It wasn't an island, of course, but down there on the beach and the whole thing. So it's a cool atmosphere. But when I did it, but it wasn't there's a lot of logistical things with that, but if there's ever a place that could do it, the UFC can certainly do it. I just, I don't really. I guess I'll be just like everybody else. I'd want to see what's going on, and I think there's been so few details about it.
After, as we mentioned earlier, the governor Gavin Newsom of California, after he made his announcements today about sports, which was big news to especially sports fans and boxing MMA fans. Was there somebody who called you in terms of like like a boxing promoter? Like, who was the first person who maybe called your office or tried to call you and say, hey, now that he kind of announced this, what's the plan here? Like, they're pretty eager to get back into the swing of things. Who was the first person to reach out?
Well, I don't know if I want to, but we all know the same people, and there's ringing a lot this afternoon. So luckily we were already working on this for a while, just to get ready for whenever Phase 3 was announced, and whenever the health professionals felt like it was okay, we just wanted to be have a plan in place that mirrored the mandate of CSAC.
And going back to the testing, once we get back into the swing of things, and you said obviously going to test all the staff, all the fighters, all the employees, all the cornermen, everybody, just like the UFC did in Jacksonville last week. Is there like a preliminary? I know it's all preliminary. Everything, like you said, is subject to change. But is there like a certain number in terms of like positive infections? Like, okay, if we hit this many infections as a result of all this testing, and it's like the day before the fight or the day of the fight, are we going to just postpone it, or are we just going to cancel it? Is there something in place for something like that, or is it just kind of just keep going?
Yeah, I think we'll take all that on a case by case basis. I mean, every situation's different, and we don't. Yeah, we're not that. I mean, the idea is to mitigate and be educated about the testing before the testing ever becomes a problem, if that makes sense. Like and that's the issue. We're still going to be discussing this at the commission meeting in a big way, and the policymakers, the commission will end up making the final policy decisions. I just execute what they make, but that's going to be on a case by case basis, and we'll see. Obviously, there'll be a lot of consultation with the medical professionals, because when you're talking about that type of thing, that's almost a medical question, and different circumstances will call for different things.
And then, Andy, in terms of like your team and your set of employees, obviously there's still people. Obviously, they're more nervous than others because of the situation at hand with COVID-19. If somebody's uncomfortable, obviously, if they're under your purview, will you not give them the right not to work that event, or if they don't want to work any events?
Oh, sure. Nobody has to. We're not going to make anybody. That's not the goal. We don't want people to be uncomfortable. We don't want any of. It's not. We don't want that. We're going to try to make everything as safe as possible. As safe, but. Yeah, absolutely. Nobody's going to be harmed, or be. Nobody has to work these shows.
And then I know we touched on the venues a little bit earlier, but is there anyone in that's maybe in the preliminary stages that you think might be the first venue to host a fight in California, from what you've been discussing in your meetings and everything?
Yeah, we talk about a lot of various venues. I guess it'll just be whoever goes first. I mean, the various promoters all have different deals with various venues and all of that. I mean, we know where Golden Boy goes. We know where Tom Loeffler goes. We know where all these people go, and I would assume it's just whoever permits first. Once we have the green light and everything's good, because the governor mentioned that this morning, but we've still got to make sure that there's no spikes, there's no this and no that, and during that time we will work and try to do a good job. And
then in terms of like obviously the local public health officials and everything, will they have like a presence in certain events as well, or will that just be all up to your team, your trained professionals? I
don't know the answer to that. I'll have to find out. Certainly they can, and certainly I think we welcome their presence at the events. We'd love to have them if they'd like to come see what's going on. And I think as we start to do this, I think various counties will take various different approaches to the way that to all the way all this is going.
And then Andy, have you halted testing? Because obviously anybody who's under your jurisdiction in the state of California who's licensed by you guys, like you mentioned in the last episode you were on with us back in January, you can test them at any time you want. Was that something that you halted when the COVID-19 pandemic began?
We did. We've not done any, to my knowledge, we've not done any drug testing of athletes since we halted events. That's, I could sit here and tell you I don't know. That would be true. We just haven't. I mean, I've not sent out inspectors. I've not. On a different point, though, I mean, along the same lines, kind of the idea of PEDs or the reason we test is to keep people from cheating in competition. So there hasn't been competition.
Right.
So, now, doesn't mean that these competitions that are coming up, it doesn't mean those fighters might not be tested, but we don't have a green light on that yet. And when that happens, CSAC will return to regulate just like normal. But we've not. That's just the truth.
And then, Andy, obviously as a fight fan yourself, and especially throughout your career and you practicing, especially MMA, like you mentioned in your first appearance on our show, you just as a fight fan, not like as a regulatory official, what's the one thing that you've missed during this pandemic, during this quarantine, the last couple months about fights in the state of California?
Well, I mean, you miss being able to just turn on the TV and find one. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of content. For a lot of times, you could either stream at the Zone, or you could go over to ESPN, or you could find something if you were interested. And it's just not. It's not. I mean, it was there last week with the UFC, but before that, it's been pretty vacant.
Andy, as in your job as executive officer, when someone like Mike Tyson talks about returning at like an age of 53. If he actually did come back, it's probably going to be an exhibition. But if he did come back for one more pro fight, someone at that age, what is it you look at before licensing them?
Well, I'd send that to the commission. But look, age alone isn't the factor that will disqualify you from a license. Basically, condition is a huge part of, but then also very importantly, I can't stress this enough. Who are you going to fight? Who's it going to be? Mm-hmm. Because if you're fighting somebody that's reasonable, that's a lot better than coming back and fighting somebody that's at the top of the pyramid. Like I mentioned to you, there's fighters start at the bottom of the mountain. They walk their way up the mountain. There's a peak that they reach, and then they come down. And then a lot of times they'll retire. And it wouldn't be appropriate to have someone who at one time was at the peak of the mountain, but now has came down, fight someone that's now at the peak of the mountain again. That wouldn't be appropriate. Mm-hmm. But if it's the opponent's reasonable, that's another factor into whether. Look, it's I don't say it's easy, but it's not that hard to get a license. You pass the medicals and do all that type of thing. Who are you going to fight? That part's harder because you guys probably hear from the promoters, I deny a lot of fights.
What do you, Andy, what did you think about, I'm pretty sure you've heard it, but Eddie Hearn over there in England has been discussing staging fights in I believe it's his backyard, right, Mike?
I think it's like the Matchroom headquarters. It used to be their family home, and then they were going to sell it, and then now they just use it as the Matchroom headquarters.
what do you think about like Eddie Hearn and Matchroom possibly putting up an event in the backyard of essentially what was his childhood home?
Well, I mean, I think if British Boxing Board sanctions it, and it's good. I mean, as long as it's done under a safe condition and it meets the, look, as long as it's safe and it's not bad for the public, I think it's good. As long as he can do it in a safe manner. I don't see why. I mean, whether it's his backyard or in a studio or wherever, because we're not having fans right now. So, I mean, he's innovative.
He is, yeah.
I know. This is obviously, like you mentioned, that just based on our discussion throughout the last 30 minutes, it'd obviously be a difficult question to answer in terms of when and maybe how. But like, ideally, when do you think fans would be able to start going to events, even if it's like maybe 6 months from now, maybe 3 months from now, maybe a little at 25%? I mean, just based on your experience, even though it's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I don't know, because while I have a lot of experience in combat sports, this is my first worldwide pandemic.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
It's not, I really don't put any light on that, because a lot of people have lost their lives. A lot of people have, gotten sick, and we certainly want to mitigate that. And I don't think any of us have ever experienced anything like that, this. And so we're trying to do the best we can, I think, to try to get through this. And I just literally don't know. It seems we're in uncharted territories, but I feel like our leaders they're doing the best they can. I feel like try to keep us, try to keep the public protected.
Right. Well, Andy, what's before we wrap up here, is there anything that you want to, tell the fight fans, the boxing fans, the MMA fans, maybe boxing promoters, but other media, whoever's listening to your interview right now, just about anything you guys are planning, you guys are discussing, anything you want to just disclose right now or talk about? I just hope everybody stays safe. I hope everybody stays safe. Everybody follows the guidelines, and boxing will be back. MMA will be back. It'll be back, but there's things, there's things more important than sports. And, I'm not sure I would have had that answer 6-8 months ago, as in general, but there are certainly you have to prioritize things, and we'll be back. But let's just do our part to be back together, because it's really gotten cliche, but it's really it couldn't be said better. We really are in this together as a country, as a world, and this thing doesn't have, we don't respect borders. It doesn't whatever. So let's keep everybody safe. That's really the what I would say. Absolutely. I don't think we could phrase it any better than that. But Andy, we don't want to take up too much more of your time right here. But like I said, we appreciate you coming on. We know, especially after today's announcement from the governor, where he's saying that sports are able to come back in some fashion beginning in June. Obviously, that's going to make your job a lot more busier in the coming weeks and the coming days, especially with all these promoters now reaching out to you a lot more seriously now that they kind of have some window of opportunity. But like I said, we appreciate you coming on the Last Round podcast again. And, you're welcome back anytime. Anytime you need to let the media know about something, you want to get some type of message out, whether it's, you guys are instituting new guidelines, new testing, anything you want, there's a platform here for you that you can utilize.
Well, I appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing both you guys at the fights again when we're all together.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, we do too. Hopefully it's a lot sooner rather than later. And, Andy, you stay safe out there, and, good luck to you and your family and all your team up in Sacramento at the moment. Good luck.
Thank you. You too.
I liked him, Mike. I like getting him on. I think he's one of the best guests that we get on every single throughout our podcasting career, I guess, if you could say. What do you think?
I just like his honesty. If he doesn't feed you a line, he just gives you like a black and white answer. And if he doesn't know the answer, he'll just tell you. So there's not much more you can really ask for. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you said, his honesty. There's not too many people who are at his stature, and not just a government agency, especially, but like any promoter or anything like that, who speak as freely and as open as he does. And I think it's great. I think it's very cool. Obviously there's certain things that he can't discuss. Like, I was trying to get it out of him to see which promoters reached out, but he's like, "Oh, you guys know which ones." But I was trying to get it out of him, but I think he's obviously we're biased because we're from California, but I would say in the United States, he's probably got the best commission in the whole country. What do you think?
I mean, he's got obviously the busiest as well. I don't think there's another commission, another state that has as many fights as California. Bob Bennett in Vegas, but Bob Bennett, you don't really see him do many interviews, if any, to be honest with you.
Right. No, you're right. You're right. And, I mean, hopefully we get Bob Bennett on the show eventually. We get Andy Foster and Bob Bennett. I mean, would you agree that maybe Andy Foster and Bob Bennett, respectively, are the biggest executives in terms of athletic commissions in the United States for boxing?
I would say so. I don't know who the one is in New York, but they would probably be in third place. So.
Right. In terms of volume of events, how we look at it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the amount of big fights that you get in Vegas, boxing and UFC, and also in California, California has one nearly every weekend, if not multiple, including, the small hall shows like Thompson's Boxing on a Thursday night. So.
Right. No, yeah, you're right. I mean, like you said, going back, I like his honesty. I like his openness. I think it was perfect timing when you told me the other day that you were able to get him back on. Obviously he talks very well and he gives us pretty good answers. But we got lucky because we didn't know that the governor of California was going to announce that sports were coming back today. So it was kind of really perfect timing. And obviously him as a big regulatory government official in terms of combat sports in the state of California. People would want to listen to his opinion, so I think it was perfect timing for that. But what do you think? Because when I asked him about how he said they're going to test people, they're going to test teams, they're going to test fighters when they have events in like a closed studio or what have you without any fans. I know he couldn't really answer that. It would have to be like just based. It would vary based on the situation. But just like, what do you think that if, let's just say they test 200 people who are there at this event, fighters and their teams and stuff, what is it going to take? And I don't want to be like cynical, but what would it take to cancel that event? Like if half of the people came back with infections or, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at it like a 50% mark of people that have got it, then, I think, the media would jump all over that if you didn't cancel it. I think the fact that the way that they're doing it, and, that old saying, it's better to be safe than sorry. When people turn up, they're tested, they're then told to isolate, probably either by themselves or in the team, because the team probably traveled together anyway. And then obviously they're not free to walk around the hotel until they've been told, your 24-hour test has come back as negative. I think that sort of thing is obviously would stop the type of spreading that we've seen. So, better to be safe to begin with, because I think that's what the UFC did. That seems to be what Eddie Hearn's talking about doing. And I think, Bob Arum's rumored to be having an event June 9th in Las Vegas. I think we've heard the rumor of, Ryan Garcia's teams talking about fighting July 4th weekend. So is Jamal Herring. So, people are now penciling in dates. So I think they're going to have to come up with probably not a foolproof method, but, 90% chance that people aren't going to get it, if they isolate, something like that.
What do you think? Like, I would, what do you think in terms of like when I asked him about ideally what venue he would prefer stuff to happen? I mean, I understand that he said, promoters obviously have certain deals with certain venues and stuff like that. Like a Golden Boy has a Fantasy Springs, stuff like that. But I was thinking it more from like a logistical standpoint, like maybe like the hotels, like Vegas, for example. There's obviously a lot of hotels right there in Vegas. So if you fought like at the MGM Grand or the T-Mobile Arena, there's a lot. That whole strip is obviously, we know, is a bunch of hotels. So it's a very close proximity. You can kind of go. It's like one little small circle. You know what I mean? So like I was thinking about like at least down here towards Southern California, LA area or something like that. I mean, what do you think in terms of something like that? Where ideally would you put a fight from a logistical standpoint?
You kind of said it. Fantasy Springs, there's a hotel attached to the casino. When we go to the fights there, the fighters, the promoters, all the teams stay in the casino. So you've got everything you want just there. You've got, rooms that they can use. You've got the casino. You've got the fight itself can all take place, right there. Everything you want in one place.
Right. Do you know if they have an exclusive deal with Golden Boy? Like, because I mean, who was the last promoter to put on an event at Fantasy Springs besides Golden Boy? At least in recent years.
I don't think anyone since I've lived over it. Not in the 6 years I've lived here.
So that kind of tells me that Golden Boy might have an exclusive deal with them. No,
I would assume so. Because if you're a small hall promoter, that's an ideal little place. It's the fans come out really well. We've been there. It's a small arena, probably holds 2,000 or 3,000, something like that. But the local fans come out for the local fighters. Right.
I mean, I like the arena. I like it. I think it's very intimate. There's, especially when there's it's like a sold out crowd. I think the last one I remember at least was Andrew Cancio. Especially when he won the title, he brought out a lot of his people, a lot of fans from that general area. And it's cool. It's, it's especially for us media, like we can get to pretty much any part of the arena pretty quickly, as opposed to maybe like a Staples Center or something. You kind of have to walk everywhere. But yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right on the money with that in terms of Fantasy Springs. It has a hotel attached to it. I think Andy also had a very good point too. And it's like, well, if you look at something like the Forum or the Staples Center, that's going to be a little bit more difficult to utilize in terms of an event, especially because it's all spread out. But I mean, I still think a lot of promoters are still gonna try to lock down those arenas, especially how he said. I don't know if it was you or him, how he said that. I think it was him who said that how promoters said, well, once we get a venue, we're going to do a lot of events there consecutively. I thought that was kind of interesting. What do you think?
I think it makes sense. They can set up shop because there's probably not going to be any of the events there. So they can, kind of set up shop, leave their equipment, because we're not going to see, concerts, comedians and stuff like that, I imagine, anytime soon coming. So that they could just do all of their events there. I'm just wondering what type of cards are we going to see? Because obviously they're talking about Shakur Stevenson against Rafael Rivera is going to be the first fight back by Top Rank, June the 9th in, I believe, MGM Grand, Las Vegas. Are they going to stack those cards with just, gimme fights? Because Eddie Hearn was saying that, these fights that he's looking at putting on in his backyard, they're all going to be lost leaders. He's going to lose money, but he's going to either keep the audience or gather some new audience over the last 10 years that he's built up. He doesn't want to lose those hardcore fans. So right. A Top Rank going to do the same thing, or are they just going to put on, kind of gimme fights where all the Top Rank A side, just mop them up?
No, you're right. And I mean, I think it's admirable, and quality of Eddie Hearn where you know, in a way, he's kind of like an Andy Foster. How we talk about how Andy Foster is very open and very honest about the questions he gets asked, and he's very open to talking to the media and everything. Eddie Hearn's also kind of like that too, whether you like him or you hate him. You know, I mean, which other promoter? I mean, I'm sure Bob Arum would say it, but like, which other promoter would say, like, yeah, I'm gonna lose money on this, but I gotta keep the fan base. I gotta try to feed that itch that they have to try to keep them and show them like, hey, you know, we're still here. You know, stay with us along this ride, and hopefully we come back stronger than ever. And, you know, I mean, I think as a fan, especially as a fan of The Zone, Eddie Hearn, Matchroom, I wouldn't see why you wouldn't want to hear something like that. What do you think?
I agree. You know, I mean, as a big combat sports fan, I think it's good to stick on some good fights. You know, the UFC cards, I watched all 3 last week. I know that the pay-per-view one did, in my opinion, relatively well, like 700,000 buys. You know, in this time, you know, there's a lot of people at home, but there's also a lot of people that aren't earning money. So I think 700,000 buys was extremely good. And I know Eddie Hearn's looking at doing the Dylan White Povetkin towards the end of I think it's the last scheduled fight that he's looking at putting on at Matchroom HQ. And, you know, how do you think something like that would perform? You know, if Top Rank decided to put on Teofimo Lopez against Lomachenko, how do you think that would perform during the quarantine?
Well, I think in terms of ratings, I think it would perform ridiculously good in terms of eyeballs. And like you said, like, you know, you touched on the UFC event last Saturday, generating 750,000 pay-per-view buys, that's a huge success. I mean, you're more of an MMA fan than I am, and you know, you keep your finger on the pulse with UFC than I am. So, like, from your perspective, if that event featuring, you know, Justin Gaethje, Tony Ferguson, you know, and that whole card, if everything was still normal and that card came on as a regular card, still fans, you know, would that card have still have still performed with 700,000 buys, or would it have been lower? What do you think?
I think, you know, the ballpark, I think it would have been similar. You know, the main event before going into it, I think just as a UFC fan, you could see that was going to be just a bloodbath. You know, 2 guys that were just going to stand and fight. And you've got to think in terms of boxing perspective, that's pretty much in the ballpark of Wilder and Fury 2, right?
Yeah. I think it was just a little. I mean, I know we heard different numbers. I think Wilder Fury maybe was like 800. I don't know, but it's about
750 to 800, right?
Ballpark, yeah, about the same. But, you know, kind of staying on that topic. What if, ideally, hypothetically, I guess, if somebody like Conor McGregor came and fought like a Khabib in a rematch, how, like, obviously because he's got the star power, you know, he attracts the casual fans, especially after his Mayweather fight and everything. Let's just say they put on a fight like that, or even going as crazy as going like, oh, let him and Mayweather rematch in front of no fans and it's just all studio. How would that perform on a pay-per-view market right now during quarantine?
I think due to the melee after the first fight, and, you know, looking at worldwide buys, I think the last one was around 2.5 million, right?
You're talking about Khabib and Conor?
Yeah.
Right.
I think it would perform similar. Maybe even beat it, you know, depending on the build-up. If Khabib and Conor are still going at it like they were before, if Dana White doesn't tell them to calm down, you know, because they kind of got kind of disrespectful, you know, talking about each other's wives and religion and stuff like that. I think it would be similar, even in this climate.
So you think even in this climate, like, it would still perform generally similar in terms of pay-per-view buys? The reason I ask is because obviously people want their sports, you know, because I mean, like, I kind of like, I mean, I defer to your opinion on that. And you said that like the Tony Ferguson, Justin Gaethje UFC event that was on last week probably would have performed around this in terms of similar numbers, even if it was like normal time still. See, like, I was thinking the opposite end. I thought maybe it outperformed what it would have if everything was still normal. I thought it would have done less than that, maybe like a 400,000 buys, 300, like, but that's just me. That's why I wanted to ask you first, because you're more of a UFC fan. Like, I thought obviously because people are stuck at home, they're like, oh, well, it's sports, it's live sports, so they're just tuned in and they bought the pay-per-view. I mean,
it's kind of hard to tell, isn't it? Because you've got so many factors. People aren't working, so they're not earning money. But at the same time, there's literally nothing else on. So if you're a sports fan, there's no baseball, there's no basketball, there's no soccer, there's no football. So it's literally the only thing to watch. So you have to work in the factors and stuff like that. And I didn't really hear anything official from the UFC, whether it underperformed or overperformed compared to what the the guesstimate beforehand.
Right. I mean, it seemed like a really good number regardless. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it was a success for them, but I wouldn't see why it wouldn't be if that number was accurate. But
in terms of boxing, that's great for
boxing. Yeah,
it really is.
Right. But I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I mean, the good news is, from an optimistic standpoint, in terms of this whole situation, and at least in terms of sports, that here in California, at least that sports has a window of opportunity now to come back in some fashion. Even if there's no fans, that's a good sign for professional sports. So, because like you said, we need content. Like we mentioned, I think last week or the week before, everybody's been watching The Last Dance, Michael Jordan documentary a lot. That's got a lot of big ratings. And we thought maybe, like, we were hearing different dates in terms of when a sport's coming back, when they could come back. So I didn't expect, I don't know about you, but I didn't expect the California governor today to make that announcement in terms of sports. Were you surprised about it? Because I was
kind of surprised compared to, his the last speech he made where, gyms aren't even open yet and stuff like that. So it was kind of out of the blue that he's now saying, sporting events can go ahead, obviously behind closed doors and sticking to certain criteria. But I'm glad.
Right. No, you're right. But, wrapping up here, of course, we want to give our big thanks to the executive officer of the California State Athletic Commission, the biggest athletic commission in the United States. This is his second time on the Last Round podcast. He was on with us back in, I was right. He was on with us back in January. Was I right about that?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think it was January time. Yeah.
Okay. I was pretty sure it was January, but I was like, well, maybe it might've been February, but I'm pretty sure it was January. But we want to give our thanks to Andy Foster again for jumping on and talking this whole situation with boxing, MMA, and sports coming back, and the whole testing thing. So I think this was a very informative interview, especially for boxing fans and MMA fans, because obviously he's a big government official in the state of California, and he would have to sign off on things and stuff like that. So I think it's good. Like you said, we keep going back to that. It's good that he's able to talk to the media like this. And I think it gains a lot more. It gains people a lot more respect for him as an official, which I think is great for boxing and MMA. But Mike, obviously, tell the fans, to our listeners, where they can follow us again.
At The Last Round 12 on Twitter and Instagram. And you can find, obviously, this episode on all major podcast networks and Boxing Social's YouTube page.
Awesome. And then before we go, Mike did do a bonus episode this past weekend where he interviewed former British champion Ashley Theophane, who was with Mayweather Promotions for 5 or 6 years. That's also up on all podcasting platforms, Stitcher, Spotify, all the usual ones, even the ones that we forget the names of sometimes. We're all over the place. But once again, for my co-host, Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round